stories. So the first story deals a little bit with what's happening in the Persian Gulf, but it deals with freedom of the seas. And it's going to take us to New York and London, to the United Nations and the International Maritime Organization. Friend of the show, Richard Mead, over at Lloyd's List, has this story: accusations fly as states clash at UN over freedom of navigation. Now, on Monday, there was a debate on the UN discussing the larger geopolitical divisions over maritime security. According to the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, former national security advisor and former congressman, Iran was behaving like two-bit pirates and said the world was now, quote, paying for Iran's hostage-taking gambit in the Strait of Hormuz. It is absolutely clear, it's unambiguous, that as a matter of international law, this strait is not, despite Iran's foreign minister's claims, this strait is not Iran's to wield like its own moat and drawbridge. It is not Iran's hostage. It is not Iran's bargaining chip. It is not Iran's toll roads. Now, I will say this, that there was a lot of discussion here recently on social media about the fact that Iran has not ratified UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982. They didn't even ratify the 1958 treaty, which means that Iran is operating under treaties that existed before 1958, which means that Iran's territorial waters is not 12 miles, it's 3 miles. It's the old cannon shot rule. That's right. So Iran has taken care of the issue of the Strait of Hormuz because they don't control any of it. Because the Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide and they only control 3 miles. Now, I will say this, the UN hearing on Monday was lively. Iran responded in kind, accusing the U.S. of, quote, acting like pirates and terrorists, targeting commercial vessels through coercion, intimidation, terrorizing their crews, unlawfully seizing ships, and taking crew members hostage. The U.S. called Iran pirates. Iran calls the U.S. pirates. I wonder if anybody else has anything to say about this. Well, as a matter of fact, they do. Both Russia and China commented on this. During the UN debate, however, UN's ambassador Fu Kang. Okay, hang on a second. I don't mean to make fun of anybody's name. I mean, my name is Salvatore. I mean, my literal name translates as Savior. You know how tough that was as a Catholic being raised with the name Savior? It was a bit of a burden in Catholic school, I will tell you. However, Fu Kang, that top-notch name right there. I'm going to go with that name. And by the way, if I do chuckle for the rest of the video, it's because I'm thinking about Fu Kang. Fu Kang called out the U.S. as, quote, the root cause of the current crisis, describing the U.S. blockade and, quote, the illegal military actions launched by the U.S. and Israel against Iran as being dangerous and irresponsible behavior. Fu is letting it fly. At the same time, Russia similarly pointed out the finger of blame at the U.S. and Israel, but opted to use the debate as a platform to attack European sanctions against Russian exports. I mean, we're going to be talking about freedom of navigation here. Russia is making the argument, listen, you put a lot of sanctions on us recently, and this is going to affect us. The Russian ambassador adding about European sanctions against Russian exports, it's merely a fig leaf to hide the fact that the EU is engaged in outright banditry at sea. Banditry at sea. Excellent use of phrase right there. I thought piracy was good, but banditry at sea, I like that too. Going on, actions by the EU countries that trample upon the norms of international maritime law could trigger a domino effect, putting on hold the entire global maritime trade system. Adding that the engagement of NATO naval forces for the detention of vessels leading directly to military escalation. All right, we got the U.S., we got Iran, we got China, we have Russia. I mean, who else can we bring into this? Hang on. The debate also exposed wider geopolitical divisions over maritime security as China denounced remarks by Japan and the EU about the South China Sea. Japan's vice foreign minister told the council meeting on maritime security that Tokyo was seriously concerned about the situation in the East China and South China Sea and reiterated Japan's opposition to any attempt to change the status quo by force and obstruction of freedom of navigation and overflight. All right, well, we got everybody now. We got the U.S., we got Iran, we got China, we got Russia, we got Japan. I mean, who else could we drag into this fight? Here we go. Several maritime and trading nations underscore that the crisis carried consequences far beyond the Strait of Hormuz. The map of global insecurity is being increasingly drawn at sea, said Liberia's representative, also adding that the growing interference with commercial shipping is not incidental, it is strategic. Echoing many other speakers, he said, quote, that it is dangerous when stability is negotiable, the smallest economies pay the highest price. According to the UK minister, freedom of navigation must be restored in line with international law. Shipping and seafarers must not be used as leverage, and there's no place for tolls or permissions in international straits. Freedom of navigation means navigation must be free. Okay, so we throw in the UK and Liberia into this. Now, Liberia is important, believe it or not, because it is actually the largest ship registry in the world. And I actually had an opportunity to go visit the Liberian ship registry. Nope, I did not fly to Monrovia in West Africa. I went up to just outside Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., because that's where the Liberian registry is located. Fantastic people. They hosted me. It was a great time. I learned so much about the Liberian Ship Registry. Now, if you want a little bit more discussion on freedom of navigation, last week Lloyd's did a series of podcasts, 2 of them, on this. The first one included myself. Why does Lloyd's want to use the worst picture of me ever used? I know this photo comes from my university, and that's the kind of the image they use, but I could have sent them a better picture than that. I mean, seriously. I mean, next time Lloyd's, just call me. It's actually a 2-part episode, so you'll have some very interesting people I follow all the time. Ami Daniels from over at Windward. Bridget Dykin was on there. My good buddy Charlie Brown is on there. So it was a good cast of characters on there. But one of the interesting things about freedom of navigation that has come up has to do with the nation of Indonesia, because there was a reference earlier this week about Indonesia maybe putting a toll on the Malacca Straits. They get clarification here in this story from Lloyd's List. Indonesia says it has no plans to toll Malacca Strait. The Southeast Asian country reassures the world that it will remain free to transit the Strait of Malacca. Indonesia's clarification came just a day after its finance chief floated the possibility of having an Iran-inspired toll booth in the waterway. Anxiety continues to grow as the Hormuz crisis remains unresolved. So that was a big issue, because Indonesia is actually a key series of choke points, not just Malacca, but Lombok, Sunda, the Bali Strait. I mean, there's a whole series of barriers there you have to go through that connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. But Indonesia doesn't control those waterways either. Malacca, for example, is bordered by Malaysia and Singapore, so this would have been a real big issue. But freedom of the navigation is an absolutely key issue here. Our second story brings us to London, England, the home of the International Maritime Organization. That is the UN shipping arm. Now, the IMO is hosting the 84th MEPC, the Marine Environment Protection Committee. Now, the last time that committee met, they were debating the net zero initiative. This was the goal to try to get global shipping to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, and it ran afoul of the United States and a batch of other nations. And so this meeting is guaranteed to be a little bit lively in its results, and it is not letting down. This story over at GCAP by Reuters: EU revives fight for global shipping carbon price, setting up IMO clash with the U.S. So European unions agreed on Friday to keep pushing for a global price on shipping CO2 emissions in UN talks next week. So the U.S. argued that this was a global shipping tax, specifically that the funds for this were going to be used to fund the UN, and then also used to for the initiation and support of other net zero initiatives around the world. Now, EU countries shall oppose any attempts to remove climate measures from being negotiated at the meeting. Now, last time what they got was a vote by 57 countries, including China and Liberia, to delay the carbon price at the meeting in October instead of passing it through. Now, a coalition of the world's top 3 ship registries, this is Liberia, Panama, the Marshall Islands, along with Bahri, this massive oil tanker company out of Saudi Arabia, are urging IMO members to consider alternatives to the original carbon pricing plan when they meet next week. Now, as I noted before, Brussels is ordering its delegation to defend the net zero framework. The question is, does Cyprus, Malta, and Greece fall in line? One of the criticisms of this MEPC is that it's being dominated by politicians and not shipping experts. That's according to the Intercargo chairman, John Zealis, who questioned whether the goal of the net zero framework really was to decarbonize shipping. So the U.S. is taking this issue head on. Instead of shying away from the IMO, they are sending not just their normal delegation, but they are reinforcing it. This is some of those politicians that was mentioned in the previous story. Mike Schuller writes this story. The chair of the Federal Maritime Commission has joined the U.S. delegation to high-stakes climate talks at the UN's International Maritime Organization. In a statement Monday, FMC chairperson Laura DiBello said she joined the U.S. delegation to reinforce U.S. opposition to the proposed net zero framework, describing the plan as, quote, unnecessary tax on U.S. shippers and vessels operating in international waters. She explicitly cited FMC authority under 46 U.S. Code 42106 and 42107 concerning unfavorable shipping conditions. The FMC is invested in the protection of U.S. cargo and closely monitoring regulations or practices of foreign governments that could result in conditions unfavorable to shipping in the foreign trade of the United States. Now, Chairperson DiBello is citing actions that have been concurrent with the passage of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act back in 2022, where we saw more action being taken by the Federal Maritime Commission to protect Americans from unfair international trade. She goes on to say that the proposal would have anti-competitive and inflationary effects on the global economy and warn costs would ultimately be passed to U.S. consumers. Now we're going to be following what happens in the IMO. The difference here is last time around the U.S. was running a high thanks to brokering the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Right now, everybody's not very keen on the United States because of the conflict in the Persian Gulf between U.S., Israel, and Iran. Now, IMO had one other issue that they cited here, which I think is really important. The IMO issues due diligence guidance to counter false flag explosion. They're checking existing databases to corroborate information, says IMO. Third-party registers should be established through clear contracts to prevent fake flags, and nearly 40 member states have seen cases of their flags being fraudulently used without prior consent. The story goes on that several members had notified the IMO of fake flag registries being run in their name. For example, Netherlands informed the IMO of false registries in St. Martin, Aruba, and Curacao. Other nations also noted this in January. Madagascar, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Guinea, Mali, all of them have identified false registries using their name. Now, it's not that hard to check this. There are databases out there you can do it, but there should be a centralized database run either through the IMO or contracted through the IMO to operate this. Plus, ship registries should be available to people to query. So, for example, a national registry should be able to answer a question 24/7. Same thing, some of the registries are run by corporations. Liberia and Marshall Islands are run by companies. Those should be accessible 24/7 to query to find out. This is one of the reasons that the United States and the EU have been boarding as many ships as they had, because they're stateless vessels. They're flying false flags. And under Article 110, Section 1D of UNCLOS, I really got to get a friggin' life that I know this off the top of my head, you can board those vessels. Navies can board. And if the ship is stateless, then the ship is freaking a pirate ship, and you can take the vessel into custody, sail it into waters to rectify the situation. You can't have stateless vessels sailing on the high seas, because if they get into trouble and an accident happens, who pays? If they don't have a registry, they probably don't have insurance, they probably haven't been inspected, and they're probably treating their crew like crap. That's probably what's been happening. All right, let's go ahead and jump to our next story. For our third story, let's talk about containers. This is a benchmark topic that we have discussed here on what's going on with shipping for a long time. Rob Wilmington over at Lloyd's: container ship charter market slows amid vessel shortage while rates stay firm. Activity has declined due to a shortage of available ships coming open in the market. So big container line companies, CMA CGM, Maersk, Hapag, will lease vessels from shipping companies that have them, basically U-Hauls of the sea. What this article is saying, that the availability of those ships is very low at this point. Despite the slowdown, charter rates remain strong and are even firming in some segments. CMA CGM continues to be the most active in the charter market among global carriers. This chart provided by Rob shows you the charter rates for ships, about the 1-year time charter average. based on size of the vessels, going from 1100 TEUs up to 8500 TEUs. You'll see the uptick in rates right around mid 2024, and they've basically held fairly steady since then. So the average 1 year time charter rate, so if you're going for a small little feeder vessel, maybe about 2500 TEU, that's a 20-foot equivalent unit, you're paying maybe $30,000 a day. If you're going for a big kind of larger vessel, an 8500 TEU ship, you may be paying up to $70,000 per day. So those costs are fixed in there. That's your leasing cost to operate those vessels. And the reason the big shipping companies lease vessels is the same reason that Amazon and a lot of other companies lease trucks during peak seasons. They don't need them all the time, and so they'd much rather bring those ships on as they need them. Plus, it defers a lot of the maintenance and operating costs for them. They don't want to be caught with a big fleet, and then all of a sudden the market crashes, shipping crashes, and now they got to deal with them and lay them up. We get this follow-on story by Rob. Global container market lines have over 40 box ships still marooned by Hormuz fallout. So 43 container ships operated by the top 10 container lines remain stranded. The outbreak of strikes on Iran in late February forced all leading carriers to suspend regional services. CMA, CGM, COSCO, Hapag, and MSC have each managed to evacuate some ships safely, although 2 MSC ships were seized by Iranian authorities. So taking those ships out of service is a major thing. We've seen CMA, CGM able to get some of their ships out. We saw COSCO get 2 of their big CSCL ships out, the Indian Ocean and the Arctic Ocean. MSC got some out, but 2 of them got nabbed on the way out. Let's take a look at Drewry's and the index here for shipping, and what are we seeing in regards to prices. This is Drewry's World Container Index. This is a compiling of all rates from around the world. You really don't book anything on this rate. It's just taking together all the rates. And what you'll see is back in 2025, particularly in the summer of 2025, we had this huge peak. Now it seems to be stabilizing. If we look at the 4 chief rates here, Shanghai to Rotterdam, Shanghai to Genoa, to Los Angeles, and to New York, again, go back to the end of February here. You can see where the rates were sitting right around 26 February right there. You can see basically in the range of $2,000, with the high being the Shanghai, the Genoa, because of the long diversion around Africa. You got to go that extra distance through the Mediterranean. But now the rates are sitting there kind of coming down a bit, but still higher than they were at the beginning of Hormuz, but nowhere near where we saw the rates back in mid-2025. One of the interesting metrics put out is by Sea Intelligence. They published this. They're what's called their Global Liner Performance Report. Specifically, this is looking at global schedule reliability. Now, this goes back to 2021. If you go prior to 2020, reliability was running right around 70-80%. In other words, if you booked your cargo, you had a 70-80% that cargo was going to arrive on time as booked. During the height of the COVID crisis, you'll see there, especially in 2021, reliability was around 30 to 40%, and it really didn't uptick until after 2023. Now it's sitting right there, right around 60%. We really haven't seen a return to high reliability, meaning that there are still a lot of issues that are plaguing the movement of containers around the world. Next, I want to look at Descartes and their global shipping report. This is the numbers for March, U.S. container imports, and they continue to climb as the global supply chain pressure mounts. So this chart shows you the import volume as per 20-foot equivalent units. Go back to 2022, you can see that high number we have here in green, and then it drops off as COVID kind of begins to phase out. 2023 is a fairly normal year in terms of how the dips and troughs are. In that, 2024 also kind of conforms to it. 2025 is all over the place because of the tariffs. We had a huge amount of front loading here early on. We have this unusual dip here in May to June, and then a massive peak in July. Again, all that was due to basically the tariffs. And then in 2026, what we see is that traditional drop from January to February that has to do with the Lunar New Year in Asia. And then we see a very kind of sharp uptick. And now what we see for 2026, we're sitting at just over 2.3 million. That's on par for what we had in 2025. And really the only year that outdid it was 2022. So we're seeing that happen right now with that influx of shipping in. If you follow FreightWaves, for example, one of the reasons I follow FreightWaves is it gives me a lot of input on the trucking side of it. And trucking rates right now are through the roof. They're higher than they've been in years. Typically, you could haul a truck, long distance truck, for about $2 a mile. It's over $3 a mile now. So the trucking industry is suffering a real big kind of resurgence here because there's a lot of cargo coming in and movement coming in. And this is all part of that container. You can't just look at container in that kind of narrow little window. You've got to look at it in the context of intermodalism. All right, let's go to our next story. For our fourth story, we're going to look at the oil sector, particularly petroleum. I know we've looked at the oil sector quite a bit with Hormuz and everything, but we're looking at other issues that are at play here. But one of them is directly related to Hormuz. This story coming out that the UAE quits OPEC in a major blow to global oil producers group. Now, the loss of the UAE could weaken the group, which has been the analysis that I've been seeing over and over again. Now, one of the things that this could do is means that the UAE could up production immensely to meet the shortfall that's being resulted with the shutdown of Hormuz. Now, the UAE has been exporting oil through their pipeline through Fujairah, about 1 million barrels per day. I'm not sure of the capability of that pipeline, but if they could ramp it up to even 2 million barrels per day, the UAE stands to make a good amount of money because Fujairah has been a place where you can get into. Yes, there have been attacks on the infrastructure there, but you can still move cargo out of there. This story from Matthew Rajandra. Global ton miles dip as Mideast Gulf or Arabian Gulf, Persian Gulf choke forces Asian refiners to slash crude imports. So the average post-war ton miles have fallen below the pre-war average, showing Atlantic and Red Sea barrels are unable to make up for the lost Middle East Gulf exports. Japanese importers fell the sharpest, with stocks drawn used to plug supply gaps, while South Korea pivots to crude oil from the Gulf of Mexico and the Red Sea. India and China see rise in arrivals from Russia and the Red Sea as overall imports fall. Now, you should be wondering right here, it's like, well, hang on a second, Sal. If oil has to travel longer distances, should that not kick ton miles up? It should, but remember, it's tons and miles. And what you're having is while miles are going up, tonnage is coming down. You'll notice here that on average, we were running about 110 billion ton miles a week, and then come the end of February into March, that dip down, it starts to kick up here a bit, and that is largely because of the added miles. But without that additional tonnage, that's why we're seeing the overall drop. Now, the other impact we're seeing is noted by Sam Chambers over at Splash 24/7. Tanker markets tip into oversupply with ballast surge. With the Strait of Hormuz closed for 60 days, the initial freight spike driven by risk premium and trade inefficiency has given way as there simply are not enough cargoes to go around. According to Sentosa shipbrokers, very large crude carriers, VLCCs, are running approximately 55% ballast, while Suezmaxes, these are the largest ships that can go through the Suez Canal, and the smaller size below them, Aframaxes, are sitting at 51%. The simultaneous crossing of the 50% threshold across all three segments is highly unusual. It goes on here, crude tanker markets have begun adopting the Hormuz closure, with Saudi exports rerouted via Yanbu averaging about 3.6 million barrels per day in recent weeks, and Emirati exports from Fujairah rising by some 400,000 barrels per day over the past 2 months. But these rerouting efforts are running into their own constraints, as Iranian attack on a pumping station 2 weeks ago raised doubts about whether Yanbu can sustain higher export volumes, while Iraqi flows via the northern pipeline, the Sion, remain stuck at around 250,000 barrels per day against a 600,000 barrel per day capacity. All right, wait a minute, Sal. Shouldn't ships be 50% full, 50% empty all the time? No. And the reason is this. Tankers will typically go into port, load, sail, and then sit for a while before offloading. So they tend to be more full than empty. What we're running into is ships are waiting to load. For example, the anchorage off Yanbu is huge, and so you've got ships waiting there. We've got ships sailing longer distances. For example, the Kunga line running to the United States. That's a long line. When the ships are arriving off Houston and off Beaumont and Galveston, they got to wait. So this is creating ships in ballast more than loaded, and that's the problem that Sam Chambers so aptly notes in his story there from Splash 24/7. And then we have this element in the petroleum oil market, gas market, and this story from Malt Humford over at G Captain. Russia-linked LNG carriers head north after reflagging, signaling the Arctic fleet expansion. Vessel tracking shows Cosmos and Mercury streaming north off the coast of Portugal, while Luke and Orion are followed currently off West Africa. In recent days, Luke started signaling Murmansk at the intended destination. So we talked about this not too long ago. Russian LNG is coming out of the Arctic and it's supplying Europe, and that is a very short distance for them to go. And that's going to be a problem because come 1 January 2027, the European Union is saying it's cutting itself off from Russian LNG. We'll see if that happens. But if Russia's got to take its LNG now and run it the Arctic route over to Asia, that's a longer distance, again, ton miles. And what we'll see is longer miles but less tonnage. What Russia needs to do is increase its tonnage. And so what are they doing? They're buying liquefied natural gas carriers, the 4 vessels in question here. At the same time, the U.S. is not letting things slide past them. This story by Mike Schuller, Golden Pass ships first LNG cargo, launching major new U.S. export supply. So Golden Pass LNG, this is a joint venture between Qatar Energy and ExxonMobil, announced Wednesday the safe loading and departure of the inaugural cargo from Sabine Pass, Texas. Once fully operational, the 3-train terminal is expected to export roughly 18 million tons per annum, making it one of the largest LNG export facilities in North America and adding major new volume to U.S. export capacity at a consequential moment for global energy markets. Now, this didn't happen yesterday, and it sure to hell didn't happen because of the U.S. attack on Iran back in February. This has been going on for a long time. There's a lot of slows in getting this going. There were issues over at the Maritime Administration getting permits, particularly during the last administration. But Golden Pass is now open, and one of the things that we're seeing is more LNG facilities are trying to get up and running. And again, if they can do that, that'll be key for the United States because there is no telling when Qatar LNG will be able to flow again out of that region. It has been largely closed off because of the Iranian blockade against it. All right, for our last story, let's look at how Hormuz is impacting 3 different areas across the shipping industry. So first, this story over at Lloyd's, the dry bulk freight rates. Now, dry bulk is any cargo that's loaded into a bulker, coal, grain, iron ore, you name it. So dry bulk freight rates poised to rise as Hormuz crisis bolsters coal demand. A substitution effort could occur where power plants burn more coal instead of crude oil products or gas to mitigate rising costs. One industry player expects dry bulk freight rates to go higher in the next 6 to 9 months. Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia also have been firing more coal since the crisis, but bottlenecks have limited the switch. Now, there's a quote in this story by Martin Stopford. He was over at the Capital Link Singapore Maritime Forum, which I don't know why you were there, Martin. You need to be writing the 4th edition of Maritime Economics. We need the 4th edition out. I mean, I don't know why you're not writing. You need to be writing all the time. Someone needs to chain this man to a computer and get him to finish writing this. It's the greatest book in maritime shipping. It is. If you haven't read Martin Stopford's Maritime Economics, the 3rd edition is available. You can download it by PDF. It's out there. But his 4th edition needs to come out because the 3rd was in 2007. Anyway, Martin Stopford said this, quote, by 1979, when the oil price really shot up to $30 a barrel, $30 a barrel, that's cute. The power stations, which were using oil, had switched from coal. They had all got their coal storage depots going again so that they could go out and buy coal. And so there was a bulker boom. So will that happen again? I don't know, Martin. That's going to be an interesting thing to see. Now, if we look at the Baltic Dry and the Baltic Dirty Tanker indices, you can see the increase here. The BDI, the Baltic Dry, is climbing. That is the light blue line there. It's coming up. The Baltic Dirty had already been up quite a bit because of what was happening with the tanker market. It has dropped quite a bit back to a level, but still higher than it had been for quite a bit. Don't take that drop as significant too much because it is still higher and continuing to rise. So not exactly sure if we're going to be shoveling coal for our power source here for a long time, but that is a definite issue. The other element we have here, this story from our good friend Greg Miller over at Lloyd's. Hormuz crisis drives up Panama Canal delays and auction prices. Mentioned this the other day. Wait times for ships without reservations have risen significantly in April. Some ships have been in the queue for 2 weeks. The average auction prices at the Panamax locks in the latest week were the highest recorded by Argus. One individual Panamax locks slot went for $1.7 million this month. A Neo-Panamax slot went for $4 million at auction this month, on par with the record set in November 2023 during Panama's drought. So Panama bids off their lock spaces. So there's only so many ships go through the canal every day, 32 to 36. But in the Neo-Panamax, this is the largest lane that was opened in 2016, you get about 10 ships a day through there. And because of the need to get oil and dry cargo and liquefied natural gas over to Asia because of the shutdown in Hormuz, there's a big demand to get through the Panama Canal faster. The problem is if you're waiting 2, 4, 7, 14 days, you want to jump to the head of the line, you can pay some money. And what we're seeing here is people are paying money. $4 million. Makes me almost want to go out in my backyard and dig a canal if I can get $4 million for a ship transit through there. Problem is ships wouldn't go anywhere. I'm kind of landlocked. Finally, the very last element in this fifth block of stories, also from Splash 24/7, no equivalent in living memory. Bunker market faces historic supply crisis. So bunker market is the fuel used to power ships. According to this story, the global bunker market is experiencing a supply shock without modern precedent, with fuel prices more than doubling at key hubs over the past month. Physical availability narrowing by the day and growing warnings that the Strait of Hormuz disruption may prove far longer than the shipping industry is currently pricing in. So to give you an idea here, very low sulfur fuel oil, VLSFO, in Singapore stood at $4.86 per ton on February 12th. By March 20th, it was at $1,034, a 113% increase in 5 weeks. At Fujairah, it had jumped from $476 to $1,248, and in Busan, Korea, $508 to $1181. Rotterdam and Houston have moving sharply too, but the divergence between basins is the critical signal. Now, marine gas oil tells an even more extreme story, with Singapore surging from $669 to $1811 per ton, up 171%, and in Fujairah from $747 to $1877. Gas oil flows are down 97%. Production shut-ins across the region have reached 9.2 million barrels per day. Refinery runs across parts of Asia and Europe are down 30 to 40%. Now, according to Gus Mahad over at Paratus, this is the largest oil supply disruption in history by volume, larger than Russia-Ukraine in 2022, larger than the Gulf War in 1991, larger than the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and larger than the Arab oil embargo in 1973. Lucas Murphy, an analyst at FuelSure, says this: physical bunker prices are increasingly decoupling from flat price, and attempts to time the market are often backfiring, with buyers facing higher prices despite softer crude. In many ports, suppliers are selling out of physical product, shifting the market firmly in their favor. I talked to a merchant mariner stuck in the Persian Gulf, and one of the things he said is when they had to refuel their vessel, they couldn't get bunker fuel, so they got actually marine gas oil because it was cheaper and available, and that's what they got because there was an overabundance of marine gas oil stuck in the Persian Gulf. They couldn't ship it out, whereas bunker fuel was at a premium. What we're seeing is the depletion of bunker fuel at key ports. For example, a lot of people are fueling now at Houston, vice fueling at Fujairah, like they would normally do. That's pulling down the bunker stores there, and that's having this weird kind of disposition on where ships can refuel and how much it's costing. Again, it's another example of how the Persian Gulf crisis is impacting global shipping. All right. Gave you 5 stories across the spectrum. There's a lot to digest in there. We talked about issues like freedom of navigation. We talked about the IMO. We talked about the different individual sectors. We talked about containerization. We talked about petroleum. We talked about bulk. We talked about what happened in the Panama Canal, what's happening with bunker fuel. And we talked about the fact that the Chinese ambassador to the UN is named Fu Kang. That's going to be with me for a while. I'm not going to lie. That one stays. That one's not going to leave my head for a long time. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, hey, go back and check out some of those earlier episodes we talked about. We deal with these issues all the time and what's going on with shipping. And if you go back prior to February 28th, when we were talking about Strait of Hormuz all the time, we went in depth in almost every one of these topics. Containers, petroleum, bulk carriers, you name it, we've done it and we have looked at it. Been on the air now over 5 years, growing immensely, nearly at 700,000 subscribers. Can you believe it? Hard to believe. But I appreciate everybody supporting this channel. If you enjoyed today's episode, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a big thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you hit that super thanks button down below. You can contribute directly to the channel or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber.